بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Dear attendees, for this webinar, we are welcoming you to attend this activity of Naseej Academy, which we try all the time to do it to help all the people in the learning and information and knowledge management field to share our ideas and knowledge, not just to support their work, but also to get their feedback about how the best way to improve all the performance that we have. For the webinar today, we will talk about something I think will represent a very big value for them. We're talking about publishing in a very distinguished journal. So the title for this webinar is the Publishing in the Global Archival Profession, Opportunity and Challenges. For sure, library information and archive specialists are not only consumer of information, but also play an important role in creating content. Journal articles are one form of content that contributes to enhancing practice, education, and research. So if anyone of you is thinking of seeking to publish his first journal article or improving his publishing output, so he is in the right place at the right time if you attend our webinar. As Naseej Academy, in this webinar, we'll give about 1.5 hours for the library information archive specialist who getting a journal article or thinking to publish, with focus on the experience and guidelines of COMA, which is International Journal on Archives, as an example. We are pleased to join in this journey Professor Bethany Anderson, the Assistant Professor and Natural and Applied Science Archivist at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, USA. She's ranked now #1 in library and information science field according to US News ranking. Also, Professor Bethany, Joint Editor-in-Chief of COMA, the International Journal on Archives, and co-editor of Archival Future, a book series published jointly by the Society of American Archivists and the American Library Association. She's interested in scientific archives and computational approach to archives. And before giving the microphone to Professor Bethany, I would invite you to write your questions and answer at the end of the presentation in the Q&A box, so they will be answered at the end of the presentation. So please, Bethany, the virtual stage is yours to start your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Abdallah and Mr. Saeed, and thank you to the Naseej Academy for the invitation to speak with you all today. And thank you all so much for attending and engaging with me in this topic. As Dr. Abdallah mentioned, I'm Bethany Anderson, and I am a science archivist at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the USA. And I'm also joint editor-in-chief of COMA, International Journal on Archives, a role that I share with my colleague, Dr. Franz Schmidt. I will be talking about the importance of publishing in the international archival literature, and we'll be using the journal COMA as an example. Please feel free to add questions in the chat as I'm talking, and I believe we'll also have time for questions at the end of the presentation. But I hope we have the opportunity for a discussion to learn more about what you would like to write or what you would be like to see represented in the archival literature. So to share a bit about myself, as I mentioned, I'm a science archivist and I work in the university archives at the University of Illinois, where I manage records of scientific units and laboratories. I'm also the joint editor-in-chief of the journal COMA, which is a role that I began in September of 2021. And I also have experience writing and publishing and other editorial experience as a former book reviews editor for American Archivist, which is the journal of the Society of American Archivists. In addition to my current role with CAMA, I am co-editor of a book series called Archival Futures, which is co-published by the Society of American Archivists and the American Library Association. So I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences and also learning about your experiences and ideas in publishing. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So today I will be talking about publishing in the global archival profession with the following objectives: to discuss the importance of contributing to the international archival literature, discuss the challenges of publishing in international journals with a focus on CAMA as an example, describe different ways to contribute to CAMA and the publication process, and I will also talk a bit about the book series that I co-edit, and provide an opportunity for questions about writing, publishing, and contributing to the archival literature. While my role is as an archivist and experience has been mostly working with archives, I do want to emphasize that colleagues from library, information science, and allied professions in general are most welcome in this discussion. So you do not need to be an archivist to participate in this discussion by any means. Stewarding and preserving archives is something that we all have a vested interest in, and as a result, discussion and scholarship about archives by necessity should create dialogues between different professions and across borders. Writing is as much about the subject that you are exploring as it is for whom you are writing. Audience matters because writing is, in my opinion, fundamentally about creating dialogue with colleagues. In thinking about the audience, it is useful to think about how one positions oneself to engage in dialogue with colleagues through writing and publishing. The first editor of CAMA was Nancy Bartlett, who is Associate Director at the Bentley Historical Library at the University of Michigan. She wrote in the foreword to the first issue of CAMA, which was published in 2001, that archivists are poised at the critical juncture between past and future, reflection and decision, continuum and change. Our work is situated at this hinge, as is our writing. And her words really resonated with me, and I think this can really be expanded to think about the international dialogues we create through writing. Archivists and information professionals and librarians are very much poised at the critical juncture between local and global, and thus our work in writing resides at this nexus that connects colleagues within our local regions and beyond. There's a number of different reasons why you might want to write and publish in general. Everyone approaches writing differently. Sometimes you know what you want to write even before you start writing. Or if you're like me, you might have a vague idea of what you want to write, but you figure that out as you start writing. Writing and publishing can be challenging and require a lot of time and effort, but it can be immensely rewarding. It can be a means to work out and test ideas, to seek answers to questions, and to grow intellectually. It can also be an important service in the sense that new voices and perspectives are needed to create and build on existing scholarship and enhance our collective knowledge. It can be gratifying to have influence over broader conversations in the professional literature and to realize that your voice and perspectives matter. There are many more benefits, of course, but writing can be fundamentally, personally rewarding. Well, why write for an international audience specifically? If you've published in a journal, there's a good chance that your scholarship has already reached a global readership. The open access movement and social media, to name a few factors, have made it easier for people to search for and find scholarship. Of course, the reach and availability of scholarship also depends on a variety of factors, including language availability and access to both digital and print copies of a journal. However our scholarship reaches others, I think it is useful to bear in mind that when we are writing not just for our local communities, but for a larger global community. I think this is especially true for those who work with archives. Archives matter across the globe. Archives are critical to the pursuit of justice, government transparency, and informed citizenry and shared historical memory and identity. The daily challenges of preserving and making archives accessible are also global, but international forums for intellectual and professional exchange afford archivists and cultural heritage stewards across the world the opportunity to share ideas and approaches to these challenges. We can thus learn a great deal from each other by engaging in these dialogues and fundamentally raise awareness about different approaches to managing and preserving archives. By learning about different approaches, it can give us ideas that can be adapted and employed in our own individual contexts, and also to think more deeply about our own practices. My philosophy is that writing and publishing can and should happen at any stage in one's career. You do not need to be a seasoned professional to write and publish, nor do you need to be a seasoned writer to publish in a professional journal. Writing is for students, new professionals, mid-career professionals, and those who are more established in their profession. At each stage, one brings fresh and different perspectives to bear on a subject. You might be midway through a project or have presented recently at a conference, and the insights you have from that project or presentation could be useful to write about so that you can further develop that idea and build on that work and get feedback from colleagues along the way. And it's important to think about the different types of contributions that one can make to the professional literature, which are many. On that note, there are a wide variety of ways to contribute to the professional literature. When those who are new to writing ask me how they can start writing, I often suggest starting with a book review. As a former book reviews editor, book reviews are typically shorter than case studies or articles, and they can be immensely helpful in helping you think critically about elements of writing, how to structure a piece, and really how to succinctly analyze and make a strong argument in a limited amount of space. This can be a useful experience for preparing one for conducting a literature review later on, for example. Another way one can contribute to the professional literature is through the writing of reports or position papers. If you are part of a professional organization, perhaps there is an opportunity for publishing a report on a project or an initiative, or to write a position paper on a specific subject. For examples of reports and position papers that have been published, the OCLC and the Council on Library and Information Resources, or CLIR, are really good examples of organizations that have published impactful reports and position papers on various subjects, such as email archiving or linked data in archives and libraries. Many journals, including CAMA, offer space for publishing case studies as well as in-depth research articles. As an example of the former, perhaps you want to write about a project you did to experiment with artificial intelligence technologies in appraising and selecting archival materials. Or you want to write about a collaborative project to create a digital platform that documents a social movement. This case study could be helpful in sharing with others how you approached using these technologies in your specific institutional setting, or how you launched your digital platform. Another type of contribution could be a research article. A research article is an original work that builds upon and offers new knowledge and ideas. It could be an investigation into a specific topic, or it could be a systematic analysis of the literature. Another way to contribute is...
Allow me just a little bit of slowing down, because the translator in the other side just trying to figure out how the best way to come up with you. Okay, thank you.
Oh, I apologize, of course. Thank you.
You're fine. You're fine.
I tend to be a fast talker, so I do apologize.
That means that you're full of passion about the topic. I can feel it. Thank you.
So another way that to contribute is to not only write, but to edit. Some journals, though not all, may have the option where you can propose to edit a special issue as a guest editor. CAMA, for example, works with special issue editors quite frequently, but these are typically members from various sections and expert groups of the International Council on Archives, or the ICA. For example, we are currently working with special issue editors on an issue of the ICA's Africa program, and an issue in tribute to the late Charles Kekskemeti, who is a Hungarian-born French archivist and prominent member of the ICA. As I mentioned, I am also co-editor for a book series and thus have worked a bit in the book publishing sector. I would be remiss in not noting that contributing to publications as either an editor of a book or as an author is also a very valuable way to contribute to the professional dialogue in more expansive treatments on a subject. Having noted all of this, different professional organizations and journals and publication venues all have different options. So this summary is not to speak for any one journal or publisher more specifically, but rather to give you a sense of some of the different writing and publishing options that might be out there. And by no means is this list exhaustive, as there are certainly many other ways to contribute to the professional dialogue through blog posts, conference proceedings, for example, or even through podcasts. So now I want to talk about some of the mechanics of writing and thinking in particular about writing for an international audience. Please bear in mind that this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but rather to distill some ideas that I have found useful in working with authors within an international context, whether they are writing a book review or a case study or an article. You may have heard before that writing is a process, and this is very true. I myself just submitted an article to a journal that I co-wrote with a colleague, and from the time when we first started working on this article last May, we have significantly rewritten and reworked this article probably 3 times. And should this article be accepted and published, hopefully, we will probably need to revise parts of it again in response to peer review feedback before it is actually published. We started working on this article last May, so it has nearly been a year since we began planning and writing. This example is to illustrate that writing takes time, and sometimes it cannot be rushed. Also, I think that writing is an important process for thinking through a problem or idea and distilling it more clearly. For me, writing is as much about thinking as it is about writing itself. We don't often know what we are going to say in a piece of writing until we actually start writing it, and that's okay. But if you know beforehand what you want to say, that's great too. One of the most valuable parts of the writing process is getting feedback. Sharing a draft with a colleague can help you see where clarification or more context might be needed. One of the most valuable things I have learned as an editor is the importance of having multiple pairs of eyes read over a manuscript, often several times. While this is especially necessary during the editorial and production phases, where copy editors and publishers may be reading over content to catch syntax and grammatical errors, I have realized the importance of having many different pairs of eyes read over the same piece several times, even before one submits it to a journal. Editing is a collaborative process, as is writing to a certain extent, and there is a great deal of value in having a colleague or two read over and edit your work before you submit it. One aspect of writing that is as critical as the words you pen on a piece of paper or type on a keyboard is the structure of the work. The structure is important whether you are writing an article or a review or a proposal for a book. This means thinking about a piece of writing from a bird's eye view. Do the sections flow together? Does the article provide the necessary context at the beginning to establish the nature of the discussion and provide the readers with the information they need to follow? Is the flow of the writing logical? Let's imagine that an article you are writing is actually a building that you are constructing. There are many different types of buildings, of course, but fundamentally there needs to be harmony between all of the building's parts in order for it to stand together. Some parts might be larger to support the smaller parts, and the building needs a firm foundation on which to stand. Just like there are many different types of buildings, so too are there many different ways to write and create a good piece of writing. So I think it is worth emphasizing that individual writing styles and approaches enrich the literature. But in order for the article to be strong, it must still have a firm foundation on which to stand. Its parts must harmoniously build on and support each other. And with the words forming the glue, so to speak, that connects everything together. John McPhee, who recently published the book, Draft Number 4 on the writing process, notes that readers should not notice the structure. It should be practically invisible. Sometimes the structure is something that needs to be refined, especially when an article does not flow or its parts do not build on each other well. The structure of a piece of writing does not need to be complex, though. If you are writing an article, all the sections and parts should build on each other in such a way as to create a cohesive and seamless flow that you don't even notice, ideally at least. More specifically for writing for an international audience, something that can be useful to bear in mind is the importance of context. When writing for colleagues around the world, bear in mind that context helps readers more deeply engage and understand the content. For example, if one were describing how the state archives in your country developed practices and approaches to managing and preserving records that it did, it would be vital to situate that discussion within the historical, political, and cultural context within which that archives was established and developed. This context can help readers better understand how the institution and its practices developed and evolved in the ways that it did. It can also help foster understanding of the history of the records themselves held by that institution. For example, archival scholar Jeanette Bastian published a great book in 2003 called Owning Memory: How a Caribbean Community Lost Its Archives and Found Its History. This book looks at the archives of the US Virgin Islands, a former colony of Denmark, whose archives were moved to Denmark at some point. And so this is a very moving and interesting work on displaced archives. And Dr. Bastian provides a great deal of context to describe the historical and cultural context as part of a rich discussion into the idea of a community of records. In a sense then, history and context matter, as we all have different unique histories and contexts in which we are working and in which the archives we may be working with are embedded. Further context can be created through citations, especially through footnotes or endnotes that provide further explanation or links to sources that, for example, provide a description of specific records laws. For example, in my former role as reviews editor for American Archivist, archival scholar Shirley Franco reviewed a Portuguese volume titled, according to the English translation, Transparency and Opacity in the State of Brazil: Use and Misuse of Governmental Information, which had been written by Jose Maria Jardim in 1999. In this retrospective review of this volume, Dr. Franco did a great job contextualizing Jardim's work on the challenges of government transparency and record keeping in Brazil. And by describing the political and legal framework and record keeping laws that had been established in Brazil and the ways government record keeping transparency had or had not been achieved, the reviewer did an expert job of situating this work in its historical and cultural context, as well as situating it within a useful framework for an international audience to engage with. Examples in the text can also further elucidate points and provide clarity for an international readership. For example, if record keeping is practiced in a specific way, readers may want to know more specifics. So providing examples can be quite useful. And on this slide, I've added the citation information to both Dr. Bastian's book and Dr. Franco's review. So if you're interested in looking at these examples, I would encourage you to do so. Just as it is important to describe and contextualize your work, it is also important to engage with and situate your scholarship in the international literature. For example, as a science archivist, I have greatly benefited from learning from other science archives colleagues across the world and learning about how they are stewarding scientific records. In my own research, when I have sought to understand how archivists are documenting and preserving a record of collaborative science, it has been very important for me to situate my own research within a broader context because, for example, a colleague at the Wellcome Library in the United Kingdom has already written about how the Wellcome approach documenting collaborative science and already tested a number of different appraisal and selection strategies. Or I just learned from a French colleague of a number of articles she has written on scientific archives based on her work at the Center for Scientific Research in Paris. Our work will be more meaningful the more it engages with extant literature from across the world. Of course, not being able to read literature because we don't have the language expertise can be a barrier to this goal, unfortunately. We should also think about whose voices are typically missing from this space. And is there scholarship from underrepresented voices that we can include and whose work we can build on? We create more meaningful dialogues, the broader and the more inclusive our engagement. In some cases, we can also more deeply understand our own practices through comparing and contrasting practices and ideas with colleagues across the globe. So now turning to CAMA as an example of a forum where one can publish. CAMA is an international and multilingual archives journal. It is also the journal of record for the International Council on Archives, or the ICA. We have a wonderful international editorial board consisting of 18 colleagues who bring a wealth of knowledge to the journal from many different parts of the globe, including Egypt, Botswana, Argentina, Sweden, and Spain, to name a few. The ICA has a number of sections, committees, and expert groups, and thus the journal has published articles, reports, and case studies that come out of the work of these groups and their activities. However, we also welcome general submissions from ICA members and colleagues more broadly from the global archival community. Comma is published twice a year by our publisher, Liverpool University Press, and we publish content in 7 languages. These include Arabic, Chinese, English, French, German, Russian, and Spanish. Articles are published in their original language, and we also ask all authors to provide an abstract of their article. All abstracts are translated into these 7 languages of the journal by members of the editorial board. Currently, Comma is not open access and only available to ICA members and institutions that have subscriptions. But my joint editor and I are investigating different models for open access so that we can make the journal more broadly available. However, I do want to mention that authors do have the option of making a post-print of their article available should they wish to do so. There are several different kinds of contributions that one can make to Comma. This could include articles and case studies, and more recently we are planning to regularly include reviews of books, but also reviews of digital resources. For example, there might be a digital humanities project or a digital exhibition that someone might be interested in reviewing. Guidelines on how to submit a review will be posted on our website soon, but if you're interested in writing a review, please feel free to reach out to us for questions about the guidelines. We also offer the option of publishing ICA conference proceedings and reports of ICA bodies. And almost every issue is centered on a specific thematic subject. For example, our most recent issue is on human rights in archives, and prior issues have focused on such topics as literary archives, intergovernmental organizations, and architectural records, to name just a few. We have forthcoming issues on the ICA's Africa program, an issue on climate change in archives, and also an issue on shared archival heritage. So we welcome colleagues to contact us if they would like to propose an issue on a special topic or have an idea for an article. You can find more information on how to submit to Comma at the link on the slide, and I can also post that in the chat later. I will now discuss the editorial and production process for the journal. Submissions may be sent directly to myself and my joint editor-in-chief by emailing us at comma@ica.org, and I can also put that email address in the chat later too. However, I do want to suggest that if you have an idea for an article or a suggestion for a book to review, I would encourage you to email us as early in your writing process as possible. Having these conversations early on can help ensure the content submitted fits within the scope of the journal. And in general, conversations between editors and authors are an important part of the dialogue around publishing. Submissions should include the article itself, a 250-word abstract, which again is needed so that we can translate it into 6 languages, and a short biography of the author or authors if it is a co-authored work. The article is reviewed by the editors-in-chief and at least 1 editorial board member. We do also offer external peer review as an option if an author would like to pursue that option. During the review process, the editorial board member and the editors will provide constructive feedback that looks at the content, structure, and ease of reading the article, and especially seeks to identify if the article addresses an interesting or significant problem, topic, or issue that would appeal to an international audience. Following review, the editors send feedback and any requests for revisions to the author with a suggested deadline for revising the article if needed. If a revised article is required and then resubmitted, it is then reviewed by the editors to make sure all of the revisions have been made and to determine if further work on the article is required. If the article is accepted, it is then copy edited by the editors and the relevant editorial board members depending on the language of the manuscript. The abstract is translated, as I mentioned, and all of the content is sent to our publisher, Liverpool University Press, who creates the page proofs, which the author will have a chance to review before publication. And then finally, publication. Content is published online and also in print, in a print version, which an ICA member can opt to receive, or they can select just a digital option if they prefer. Once an issue is published, the ICA and Liverpool University Press both help promote the issue on social media and in various communication forums. So I now want to shift gears and talk about another forum for publication. Separate from my role as joint editor-in-chief of CAMA, I am also co-editor of a book series that is co-published by two different professional organizations, the Society of American Archivists and the American Library Association. The series is called Archival Futures and seeks to publish short think pieces on various social and technological topics. And by short, we mean books that are between 20,000 words and 50,000 words in length. Our first book in the series is A Matter of Facts, The Value of Evidence in an Information Age, which was written by Dr. Laura Millar. This book looks at the ways that the digital age has opened the door to a post-truth world in which the authenticity and validity of facts can be hard to ascertain. We also have two other books in the process that will be published soon. One on decolonizing archives and the other on the representation of archives and archivists in pop culture with a focus on time travel narratives. So that should be an interesting two books. Books in the series are only published in English, unfortunately, so I just wanted to mention that as well. My co-editor, Amy Cooper-Carey, and I welcome inquiries about ideas for books, so please feel free to email us. The process for submitting a book entails writing a proposal following the rubric on the webpage for the book series. The proposal is then reviewed by my co-editor and myself, first before deciding whether the proposal merits further review and can move along in the process. Proposals are then peer-reviewed to determine whether the proposal should be contracted for a book. A proposal is only officially accepted once a contract for the book is in place and signed. Manuscripts are generally due in about 8 months from acceptance of the manuscript, but the deadline is negotiable, just depending upon how much time the author may need. Once the manuscript is received, it is peer-reviewed again, ideally by the same people who peer-reviewed the proposal, to help provide feedback to the authors or to the author. An author is then given a deadline to submit the revised manuscript, and once it is finalized, it is sent to the American Library Association's editorial office, which takes care of creating an index, page proof creation, and overall layout and production of the volume. And for more information on the book series, please see the link on the slide. And again, I will also paste that in the chat later so you can check that out. So to start by summing up my talk, I want to emphasize that we do not write and create scholarship in a vacuum. As professionals, we are part of a larger global profession, and there is so much that connects us together and that we can share with each other. Our professional writing can be sparked by conversations with colleagues, or we can even conceptualize our writing as a type of conversation in of itself. Writing can also be sparked by questions that we seek to find answers to. As I mentioned earlier, writing is a process, and so we don't often know what we want to say until we have begun the process of writing itself. And sometimes that can lead to more questions than answers, and that's okay. But none of this is to discount how challenging writing can be. It takes time and effort. but writing is fundamentally a collegial endeavor which can broaden our perspectives and create dialogues with colleagues. So even if it is something that might seem challenging and high barrier, it is worth the effort. So I've covered a lot of information, but I very much hope to engage you all in discussion about the publishing opportunities that I've discussed, and also learn more about what you were thinking about writing and publishing on, or what topics you would like to see published in the archival literature. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you again to the Naseej Academy for this invitation to talk with you on this topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bethany, and I'm so happy that you make it very concise and to the point. So this will give us more time. If there is a question, we will have it. So first of all, I would like to thank you so much for this informative and stimulated webinar, which I'm sure it motivated many of our attendees to sit after this webinar and draw their own roadmap to publish 1 or 2 articles, whether in COMA or any other cutting-edge journals in the field. Also, and as I always say, successful and effective webinar is the one that raises questions, not the one that only gives answer. So, I can tell that your webinar is this kind of webinar. So thank you again, and we really enjoyed this one. And now we can move to the question. So I invited all the people. I already start to receive some of them. And let's start with this one. Thank you for this webinar and sharing your experience and advice and regarding publishing. And he is asking, you mentioned that there is a possibility to publish in COMA in Arabic language. If yes, what are the guidelines to do so?
Yes, thank you for that question. I just posted in the chat a link to instructions to submit to COMA. Right now our instructions are only available in English and in French, but we're hoping to have those instructions translated into the all seven languages of the journal. So hopefully we do have an Arabic version soon. But yeah, I do want to say that contributions in Arabic are most welcome, and we'd love to hear your ideas and talk to you about what you would like to publish. So please feel free to follow up with myself and my co-editor if you do have questions, and I will put our email address in the chat right now so that you have that as well. And yes, like I said, please feel free to reach out, and we would love to talk to you.
Perfect. I will take the thread from this question and ask you from myself. Question regarding to, do you have a special process to get approval from the author if you need to translate a unique article from his language to other language or the 7th language?
Yeah, we have translated articles from various languages in the past. There was actually an article I was looking at the other day. It was titled Memory of a Person, and it was a sort of an essay on reflecting on the nature of memory and what memory portends for records and archives. And the article was originally in Swedish, and it was translated into English. So, certainly if we have the language expertise on the editorial board, we can try to translate articles into languages as requested. But as I mentioned, we translate all of the abstracts for articles into all 7 languages, so that if someone wants to find out what a language that's published in Spanish, for example, is about, they can read the abstract in their language and be able to find that out. And then, if they have further questions, we can connect them with the author if they would like to have that dialogue and engagement around their work.
Perfect. Thank you for that. We have another question here. It's, what are the big challenges you think that the researchers are facing to publish their work, whether in COMA or any other scientific journal, and how to overcome such challenges?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'd have to give that a little bit more thought, to be honest with you, but
take your time with this one. We have plenty of time.
Yeah, I think you know, it's really important to, you know, as I mentioned, to try to engage the international literature as much as possible when you're writing. But language expertise, you know, of course, can be a barrier to that if you don't read, you know, for example, if someone doesn't read in Arabic or if they don't read in German, you know, that can be a bit of a challenge. You know, there's tools out there like Google Translate, you know, which could be helpful, but of course they're not a panacea, as it were, for this kind of situation. But I think that, yeah, that is definitely one of the challenges, I think, especially if you want to publish in an international context, in you know, trying to be more inclusive in that regard. I also think that time can be a challenge too. Just, you know, as I mentioned, writing takes a lot of time. You know, I myself have been working on an article for almost an entire year. And so, you know, finding the time to just set aside and write, you know, can be challenging. Everybody approaches writing differently. So you need to find, you know, what works best for you, whether that's, you know, trying to set aside 30 minutes a day for writing, or if you can even do that, you know, once a week, you know, set aside like an hour to write on, you know, to work on an article. I think, you know, it's just really important to think about what works best for you, because that's when you'll be most productive and your writing will be at its best if you're not forcing it too much. Although sometimes you do have to force yourself a little bit if you need some motivation. So,
Yeah.
so I don't know if that helps, if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think this webinar will be one of the factors that will help them just to overcome these challenges. Another question here, I can just see the follow, and also I encourage our beloved attendees just to send their question, whether in Arabic or in English, but for sure not in the 7 languages that Bethany told us about COMA. So in English and Arabic, we can just submit it to you here. So from your point of view, which is having more opportunity to be accepted in COMA, the solo article or the joint one? It's an interesting one, I guess. Good one.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Thank you for that question. Yeah, sometimes I've noticed that, particularly if you're newer to writing, that co-authoring a piece can be a useful way to start. So that might be one thing to think about. So if you, you know, you can build on the strengths of your co-author. So that might be useful. I also think that, you know, putting that aside, co-authoring articles can make a piece stronger because you're bringing more perspectives to bear on a topic, and that can, you know, lead to a richer discussion in an article. This is not to say that a single authored article, you know, wouldn't be strong on its own, but you know, certainly it can lead to a richer discussion, for sure, if you do want to work with a colleague on authoring an article. I wouldn't say that either way leads to more success in terms of what ends up getting published. You know, it really depends upon the article. So there have been cases where you know, I was working with an author and they wanted to, you know, they kept working on draft after draft of a piece, and you know, finally, my co-editor and I suggested that they work with somebody to help build this idea on further, you know, to see if that would help, you know, provide a more holistic approach to the topic that they were seeking to do. So, you know, it really depends upon where you are in your research process, you know, what you're comfortable with doing, and the topic that you're focusing on. So yeah, thank you for that. I hope that helps.
I'm totally agree with you, Bethany, about this, especially if the joint work will be identifying clearly the role of everyone just participated in this work, so it will be clear. Also, if you got someone from another field like IT or engineering or whatever it is, so I think this also will give added value to the work itself. You open our appetizer for comma, so a lot of question about it. There is a question here. Okay, publishing comma, is it? This is in Arabic, so I translated for my understanding. Publishing comma, is it free, or the researcher should pay for that?
Yes, there's no charge to publish in comma. It is free. Liverpool University Press, which is our publisher, does have an article processing charge if you would like to make your article open access. But as I mentioned, authors are welcome to make a post-print of their article available afterwards. So that, and that there's no charge for that. And, as I mentioned too, we're hoping to make the journal more open access in the future. So that's definitely an important goal for us moving forward. But yeah, absolutely no cost.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah, I think this is also depends on. I'm sure that there is a policy for publishing in comma, but I think now if you just think about converting to be open access, I think this also will be another way or trend to make comma available. That lead us to the next question. When you expect just to be open access, or this will take a little bit sometimes? This is the next question I have.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We don't know exactly when we'll be able to do that. We have drafted a plan for the journal. As I mentioned, my co-editor and I are fairly new in our roles. We've been in our roles as editors-in-chief since last September. So this is something that we're working on and developing, and we're getting feedback from the editorial board and various stakeholders, to see what would work best for this, important international journal and how we can best make it openly accessible. So yeah, and I would love to have any suggestions from the audience too for, open access journals that you've encountered and you enjoyed accessing, that you thought had some great features. Would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on that. So thank you.
Sure. We'll have this open invitation for all our attendees. So thank you so much for thinking about it. What is the average time between submitting the author manuscripts and being published? For sure, in comma.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a good question. So I'm in the process of working on my first issue for comma. And so far it has been a couple months. I think we started working on this issue formally in December, and we're aiming to have the issue published in hopefully July or August. So it is a couple months in terms of the process, but it really depends upon when you submit your article and where we are in our production and publication schedule. So if someone were to submit an article and we, we're in the middle of another issue and we can't fit that article into the next issue, it'll have to go in the following. It may be a little bit longer. So it just really depends upon, when it's submitted in the process and so forth.
Perfect. And I think also it depends about how this article is just developed, and this is the survey, or this is a report, or this is something need more time to be reviewed from expert. So thank you for answering this question. There is a question, it's asking for advice more than question. So could you tell us how an author increase his H index? And for sure that publishing comma will give more privilege for the author for their resume.
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, you're asking if yeah, where would be the best place to publish an article? Is that, did I get that correctly?
They focusing on the H index, how to increase the H index.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, the H index. Yeah, that's a really good question. Most journals make information about, well, I shouldn't say most, should say a lot of journals make information about the H index available online.
Yes.
So you may want to do some research into that beforehand. And I have to sheepishly admit that I don't know offhand what the H index is for comma, but I can certainly find out that information and provide that if that would be helpful. But you know, generally speaking, it's really vital to try to make sure your work is published and made broadly available. So I'm a firm believer in open access, and I think it's a really valuable way to publish and promote one's research. So I think that's something useful to bear in mind. And there's a lot of journals that have, you know, delayed open access as a model. So that might mean that the most recent issue or two is only available to members of an organization or subscribers to that journal. And so I wouldn't discount journals that have that kind of model too, because they will, you know, eventually make the content open access, you know, once it gets past the embargo period. But yeah, I think there's a number of factors to consider when you're thinking about a journal, you know, which is, you know, when your article will be openly available. You know, also the scope of the journal. Different journals have different scopes. So if you're looking to publish, let's say, in a more interdisciplinary focused journal, you might want to look at, you know, a journal that publishes content on archives, libraries, digital humanities, and kind of a broader array of subjects. So I think there's a lot of things that are really important to look into when you're thinking about a journal, and particularly the audience that you want to reach and be in conversation with.
Yes, yes, thank you. I think related to that, we have a question also related to comma. What is the subject that will be accepted, or at least this is the subject frame for comma to accept articles? So is it specific topics, or if anyone just having a topic he can publish there and send it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. I think that, you know, as long as the topic deals with archives and records in some way, I think it would fall under the purview of comma. Our scope for the journal is quite broad. You know, as I mentioned, we do publish content from various expert groups, committees, and sections of the ICA, of the International Council on Archives, but we welcome submissions more broadly from colleagues who are part of the global archival and information science community. So if you have an idea for an article that, you know, in some way, shape, or form kind of relates to archives, you know, certainly consider comma as a place for publishing your work. But again, I want to emphasize that my co-editor and I would love to talk to you too. So please feel free to email us if you want to have a conversation first, to, you know, determine whether, you know, comma would be a good fit for you, more or less. So I do think having those conversations as early in the writing and editorial process as possible are really valuable, so that we, the editors and the authors, can talk about these issues and make a recommendation or suggestions about, you know, what would be the best path to take.
Perfect. That again leads us to another question. Is comma accept? It's in Arabic, so I try to translate it in the right way. It's you accept in comma publishing article about the Arabic historical document or manuscript. It is okay. I think it's right.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Yeah, absolutely. I would encourage whoever asked that question to please reach out and email my co-editor and I, because we'd love to learn more about about your work. And again, emphasize that we can publish the article in Arabic if it is written in Arabic.
Perfect.
But yeah.
So be ready for have a flow of articles after this webinar.
Yes. I look forward to it.
Yeah, this is one of the goals that we think about when we think about this joint webinar, and thank you so much. Okay, do you collaborate? This is another question from Mr. Sulaiman. Do you collaborate with ICA in terms of publishing archives, guides, and preparing manuals?
Yeah, we do collaborate with the various sections of and committees and expert groups of the ICA. Hopefully it's not too premature for me to mention this, but we're currently talking to the business archive section about potentially publishing a set of guidelines and a report that they've recently written on, which considers an international comparison of business archives. So we're looking into how we can get that particular work published through Liverpool University Press. So there's lots of different ways we can work with the different ICA sections and publish the work of their projects and their initiatives and their activities. There's an ICA section on university and research archives. Its acronym is ICA-SUB. And a few years ago, the journal published the proceedings of one of the ICA-SUB's conferences that they had in Spain. And so there's, conference proceedings that can be published through the journal, reports, sort of broader guidelines that that committees and sections are working on too, which may not be appropriate for the journal per se, but Liverpool University Press, as I mentioned, does have other options for publishing sort of monographs too, which we haven't done a whole lot of, but I think it'd be great for us to explore doing that more and more, for sure. So.
Okay.
Yes.
There is a grateful and thanks from one attendee, and saying that it's a nice presentation. And he's asking, is COMA indexed within Web of Science or Scopus?
I apologize. I didn't quite hear your question.
Okay, he is asking about COMA. Is it already indexed by Web of Science or Scopus?
Yes, it is indexed. Let me see here by, I believe Scopus. Yes. So yeah, so the contents of the journal are more broadly made available that way as well. And I'll have I think there might be one other entity, but I can't recall that offhand. But I can find that out and certainly share that information.
Fine, for sure. I'm sure that the impact factor for COMA is high enough just to attract a lot of researchers to publish it. I'm positive about this. Okay, I try to stick to our time, and we do appreciate your effort and time. So the last question we have here, I did apologize for the rest of the question. We will receive it. Talking about the Archival Future book series, what is your policy regarding accepting book to be published?
I'm going to put in the chat the links to the guidelines for Archival Futures so that you have that available. But we, yeah, but basically, if you're interested in publishing a book, we would ask that you prepare a proposal and then submit it to myself and my co-editor. And at that link that I put in the chat, we outline, the various elements of the proposal that we would like to see represented. So, we would, it would be great to learn what the purpose and scope of the book is that you have in mind, what the main argument or premise would be, the estimated length, which is something that can be a little bit hard to determine because, as I mentioned, I typically kind of decide what I'm going to write as I'm writing. And so estimating word length might be a bit tricky, but that's something that, again, just as an estimate. And also thinking about, who the audience is. and what the value to the archival profession of the book would be. The book series it's geared to be toward an archival audience, but we're also trying to engage broader audiences in these topics and trying to promote the value of archives and records to society. So, as a result of that, we encourage authors to think about how they can, write a book that sort of distills more complex archival concepts and makes them accessible to a general audience. So that's something that is really important to keep in mind. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that book series if you have an interest in that as well. So I hope that answered your question, but I'm happy to elaborate as well.
Yeah, you covered it very well. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Bethany. And I think, again, this is just the first drop of a heavy rain that of other webinars you will join with us. We do appreciate your time and effort again, and the informative presentation you provided today. I have nothing to add except just invite you just to wrapping up this webinar and thank all attendees we have, and we confirm about that. We will send you for the attendee the certificate for attending this one with all the signatures of us. And for sure that in the Nasiij Academy website, you will find this valuable presentation. Please, the last word will be from your side, Bethany. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time to talk with you all and to talk about these different publishing opportunities. And I would, love to have any questions or suggestions for either CAMA or the Archival Futures series. So please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you again, Dr. Abdallah and the Naseej Academy for having me. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
The honor is us, and we thank you so much, and see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
شكرا لكم ونراكم على خير إن شاء الله في ويبينار آخر.